So you're good to go whenever you want to call to order, Mike.
There is nothing going on.
Shall we give Gigi a minute or so?
I think it'll be okay.
Okay.
No one's investing.
I'll give her a minute.
No one's like.
Somebody requested. We're testing it from our custody office. Okay, correct. You can show us those for transfer participants.
I'll call a meeting to order. Time is 10:01. Everybody, can you give me a nod if you can hear me and see me okay? All right, thank you. We'll go through roll call. I'm Mike Archikowski, and I'm zooming from Marquette. Mary?
Mary Schlitt, who, also on Zoom from Marquette.
Because when that
Ken?
initially happened.
Omar, zooming from Marquette.
You had said you didn't have any
Jeff and
knowledge of
Kurt?
any of its stuff was. So
Kurt
we were
Augustine
trying to
from
find out
Milwaukee.
when that officer came to your house.
Jeff Blewett in Marquette.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not seen anybody else in the room besides the city of Marquette administrator.
And I
Do we
don't know
note
where
any agenda changes? Not seeing any, not hearing any.
And
Move on to approving the agenda.
right, as far as I was concerned.
Can I get anybody move to do that?
So. I
So
don't-
Gigi's here.
Can we move the presentation before the election of
I
officers?
don't know how it restarted.
Sure.
I don't know. Originally.
Sounds like you move. Anybody got a motion?
Truth to it.
I'll second.
All right, thank you. We'll move election till after the presentation.
Thank you.
And so we got Gigi online.
It would seem, right, it would seem awful strange that
Morning, Gigi.
I completely agree with it. It's not something that we want to
We'll give her a sec to log in there.
know.
Looks like her audio is not enabled.
Gigi, can you give us a nod
Supposedly she'll
if you can hear us?
Which is why I'm asking. I have no idea. Yeah, I
Again, we'll give her a sec to get rolling here.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That could very well be the case, but I know from my point, we have moved on. We're not chasing you around. We're not sneaking around after you. We're not nothing. I mean, it was over and done with. Right. It was over and done with as far as I was concerned too. I'm sorry to waste your and Kyle's time with this one. You know, I don't want to go about this kind of thing either. And I'm sure you want to move on too. It's a crap situation for you to have happen.
Are you there, Gigi?
I agree, it's traumatic and it's lousy.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I am. Good morning. For roll call,
Morning.
can we get your name and where you're zooming from?
Gigi Gordon. I'm zooming from my office at H&R Block,
right.
US 41.
Thank you. We had just made it to moving the election to after the presentation and voted on
Okay.
that. So we're going to get into the first item, announcements by the chairperson. I have nothing. So we'll move on to number 2, public comment. Does anybody out there want to make public comment? Not hearing anything. So move on to number 3, presentation by Wells Fargo
Someone basically.
investments. So Kurt and Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, I appreciate that. Kurt, before you do your national anthem, anything you want to add?
No, all I wanted to really say is the fact that we're still on track for a migration from Wells Fargo to Principal in the fall of this year. So more news later.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, thank you, Kurt. I will try to be brief, but there's a lot to unpack here in 2020. I expect you're going to find historians and economists muttering into corners for years following this year. But again, I will try to be brief. So if you want to look at the second page, or I should, the first page, page 1, the asset class returns, this does a pretty decent job of sort of characterizing 2020. Against all odds, it was what we'd consider to be a risk on year. So right at the top in the upper right corner in 2020, small cap stocks, large cap stocks, emerging market stocks all performed very, very well. The fourth quarter did a lot to lift those specific asset classes, but it was a good year for equities, a good year for stocks, sort of against all odds in light of some pretty horrendous news and some serious headwinds. We'll get into some of the details of why that may be. So on page 2, we get into the equities, current market status, stocks. So equities in the quarters, you can see S&P 500 was up 12.1%, year to date 18%. And it was kind of the same story across the board for small caps and international, and largely for, I'd say, 3 reasons. Number one, just the vaccine. The market just kind of kept chugging until we got to some clearer waters and started to feel a little bit better on that front. Number 2, stimulus. The market expected stimulus and it received it, and it's probably going to get another big slug here shortly. I mean, they're talking about $1.9 trillion, $1,400 going out to individuals, and the market likes that. That's discretionary income that people can spend, and that lifts markets. Number 3, delayed tax changes. There was some concern around President Biden's election that he was going to raise taxes. Well, I think he will, but it's just hard to do that in the middle of a global pandemic and with the headwinds that we see. And they recognize that, and the market understands that. So it looks like tax changes and a lot of those reforms are probably going to be seriously delayed just because the market sort of needs that, and it's practical. So that has lifted the markets. I mean, across the board, it was a really good year for the stock market. International in the fourth quarter, developed was up 16%, year to date 8%. So they even had a turnaround. One thing I sort of hammer on and I'm continually surprised by is growth versus value. So growth stocks, think Netflix, Amazon, Tesla, year to date, they were up 38%. Value stocks, think banks like Wells Fargo, Berkshire Hathaway was up 2.8, but you saw in the quarter that was reversed. So value actually outpaced growth in a quarter for the first time in seemingly forever. That probably just indicates that that's probably going to be a trend or a theme that we're going to see in the next couple of years, sort of a return from growth dominant to value is going to start to have a place again. So that's reassuring. I mean, I call that good news, more normal markets. So on the next page, page 3, we talk about fixed income. It was kind of a quiet year for fixed income, or quiet quarter, I should say, 0.7% for the U.S. aggregate. Year to date, it was up 7.5%. There is certainly no concern around inflation right now in the markets. There's not a lot of concern around the national debt and some of these bills that we're going to have to pay in the future. If you look around the world, you're still seeing negative yields in places like Germany, Japan. So we're just kind of the cleanest dirty shirt from that standpoint. 10-year treasuries spent most of the quarter below 1%, which is startling. They're up to 1.3% now, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a little bit more comfortable. One thing in terms of fixed income that sort of speaks to the crazy year. So we sell CDs to individuals where it makes sense. And still a 2-year CD is only yielding 0.1%, meaning that you need to park money and in return for that, you only get 0.1%. It's crazy. And you haven't seen that lift. At some point you will, but we're certainly not there yet. High yield had a good year. Even international bonds did okay. It was a good year for fixed income, and it really speaks to the role of fixed income in a portfolio. You saw that flight to safety when everyone rushed into it in March and April and February, and then they continued be strong. And then you saw growth from equities in the fourth quarter, and bonds kind of took a little breather, but it was a good year for bonds as well. Next page is the U.S. economic overview. So that, I mean, just the growth numbers were all over the place for the year. And just to recap it, so you had -5% first quarter, -31% second quarter, which is unprecedented. Third quarter up 33%, and the fourth quarter was up 4%. So there's reason to be optimistic. The market did settle to a certain degree. At the same time, there's still this disconnect out there between, let's call them haves and have-nots. I mean, a lot of people with market growth had a really good year, but obviously there's a lot of people suffering in a pandemic, which is why you're still seeing the government support individuals across the board with stimulus checks. So even though it was a good year from an economic standpoint, there's still a lot of underlying problems in the economy that the market is sort of working through. And that's just going to take some time and is really to be expected. But the Fed is doing what it's supposed to do. It's keeping rates low. It's giving everyone a lift. And it seems as if we're headed in the right direction. So there's reason to be optimistic for sure. Next page, international economic overview. International was okay. It struggled more than the US. That's kind of been the theme for the last 10 years, really. And last year specifically, the more coronavirus containment you saw, the better performance you saw in these countries. So Asia did better than Europe, as an example. I mean, Australia, New Zealand, there's a number of countries that really came through this really well and did better than others. But generally speaking, it was just a negative year across the board. But in the fourth quarter, you start to see that ramp up. Next page, page 6, economic and market forecasts. So this year, the takeaway from this page is we're expecting US GDP growth to be 4.7%. So we're going to grow close to 5% based on what we see. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's going to be a nice positive year. And let's call it maybe a normal year as all this built up, pent up demand starts to be unleashed. That's going to help. If we get infrastructure moving, you're going to see spending on that front too. So we're reasonably optimistic about this year. And toward the bottom of the page, global equities, basically modest growth is our call, 5 to 7% growth. So we think that it's going to be okay, but it just seems unlikely that it's going to be a huge year in terms of returns. But I wouldn't have said that 2020 was going to be a huge year back in March either. And it turned out to be a pretty strong year. So strange times. If you want to jump a couple pages, get to your cash flow page on page 10. So the current market value of the portfolio is $43,039,954. So for the quarter, we added $4.3 million in investment gains. You can see where the quarter started, and you can read these numbers for yourself. All the way over on the right side, the since inception numbers are pretty compelling. So $43 million current portfolio, and you can see that the $20 million in investment gains since 2013. That's just the market winds have been in our backs. The numbers are staggering. It's been a good time to be an investor. And we sure like the fact that it's helped the city of Marquette Fire and Pension Board. Next page, page 11 and 12 are going to look familiar to you. This is just the allocation. 60% equities, roughly 37% fixed income, little splash of cash, and that's been somewhat consistent. 2020 was definitely a year for rebalancing with all the movements going on, just getting the gears back to where we want them to be in terms of risk tolerance. Page 12 is just the funds listed, the 12 equity funds and the 4 fixed income funds. So you see how that allocation breaks down. Page 13 is the performance page. So for the quarter for the city of Marquette, it was up 11.25%. Very strong growth. Year to date, 15.91%. You can see the other numbers. So we're really happy with the way our performance shook out for the year. And we beat every equity and fixed income category or benchmark, I should say, on the 1 year and the 3 year now. So we're ahead of our benchmarks and we're happy with that. There's really no laggard in terms of performance from our standpoint. A few funds that we're keeping an eye on, but it was a good year and the markets did all the work for sure, but we're happy with where our funds were positioned. I should stop there. Any questions? Anything jump out at anyone as I stroll through this? It's a little hard to do it on Zoom relative to in person in terms of questions, but you have any, let me know. And on the next page, page 15, you just see the fund breakdown. So I like how we illustrate parenthetically the numbers. So an example on top of page 15 is Dodge and Cox fund for the quarter is 12. So that's the percentile. And you can see just looking around at these numbers, lower is better. And you're seeing the numbers sort of where we want them on this page. There's really nothing startling from a return standpoint or performance standpoint, I should say. You did start to see in the quarter, the value stocks, again, start to do better than the growth stocks, which is a reversal of what we've seen for years now. But again, we find that somewhat reassuring. And on page 16, you see some other performance, the rest of the funds broken down. So you see the international and the fixed income. Probably keeping an eye on that Lazard International Equity Fund. The quarter and the long-term numbers are sort of questionable, but I mean, 1 year and 3 year numbers were really strong. So it's not overly concerning, but some of the things that we're watching and the fixed income funds at the bottom of the page, the year to date, I mean, 9% basically across the board for the 4 fixed income funds. So again, just a very, very strong year for stocks. And you see it also here reflected in fixed income. Happy with our performance. Any questions? Sometimes on Zoom, I feel like I go way too fast and can't read where people are at. So if you have anything to say, please let me know. But that's it for the Meta portfolio. Anything you want me to double back on or spend more time on? Happy to do that.
Hard to complain about those numbers, Jeff.
Yeah, it was just a really good year across the board. Surprising to a large degree, really, but
Surprising, yeah.
Jeff and Kurt, are you guys, anything else for the good of the order, or was that about it?
That was about it from me.
All right.
That's
Thanks.
it for me.
Thank you guys for joining us, and thanks for keeping an eye on those investments for us. We do appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll see you again for the next quarter meeting.
All right.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Thanks
Thanks,
for
Jeff.
inviting us. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Okay. Can we move on to item number 4, the consent agenda? We'll hopefully approve the December 22nd, 2020 minutes. And Kurt, I'm
Mike?
sorry, Ken. Yeah,
Let's do the election of officers before we move any further through the agenda.
gotcha. We'll do that right now. I'm all set with sticking with the same slate that we have right now.
I will make a motion to keep the current slate of officers, having Mike Archikowski as the president and continuing with Ken Lamar as secretary.
Thank you. Any seconds?
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Seeing none, passes 4-0. And we'll move on to, sorry, now we can do item 4, the consent
Thank you.
agenda. Ken, are you prepared to read from the December
Yeah.
minutes?
Yep. We had a meeting Tuesday, December 22nd, 2020 at 10 a.m. Public comment, none. Consent agenda. There's a motion by Schlitz, second by Lamar to approve the consent agenda from the October 27th meeting. Motion carried. New business financial reports as of November 30th, 2020. Total portfolio was 41,883,574. Of that total, approximately 41,717,000 is in investments and 166,000 in checking. Investment account has had a $4.3 million increase since the beginning of the fiscal year. Item B, we had a MAPERS membership renewal, 2021 motion to renew MAPERS membership for calendar year 2021 by Lamar, second by Schlitt. Motion passed. We also approved the 2021 meeting schedule. According to bylaws, we meet on the 4th Tuesday of every month at 8:30 a.m. There was some discussion and changing the meeting times to 10 o'clock a.m. on the Zoom platform due to current meeting practices with COVID. We resolved to keep the regular meeting times, dates as per bylaws for the remainder of 2021. Make a special announcement when it was changed to the Zoom at 10. 2021 schedule for committee reports, July 12th. Received, reviewed, and filed. No public comment. There was a motion for adjournment by Archikowski, second by Schlitt. Motion carried 3-0. Meeting adjourned 10:20 a.m. That's it.
All right, thank you. Any motions to approve?
I move to approve the minutes as written.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 4-0. Item 5, old business, we have none, so we'll move on to item 6. Item 6A is the financial reports of January 31st, 2021.
So we just had a wrap-up presentation from Wells Fargo for the December 31, 2020 balances. So this report just kind of updates us through the end of January. So we've actually had a little bit of a decline. In December, our portfolio balance stood at 43,050,119. And as of January 31, it is now 42,661,221. The breakup of that, we have about 44,000 in checking, and the remainder is going to be in our investments. So the movers for the month, we had about 29,882 came in the employee contributions to the fund. And then we had negative 418,757 in the investment fund. A breakdown of that figure, the 418,780. We did have some gains. We had about 14,000 in dividends and investments, or excuse me, dividends and interest. Capital gains, again, this is what we have earned, money that we've received for selling some of those investments. We had 238,688. And then retiree payouts for the month was 211,000. We paid our quarterly expenditures to Wells Fargo, which was 30,811. And then we're still holding investments that are currently at a loss of 428,000. So overall, for the fiscal year, these last 4 months, we have a net change of positive 5.129 million.
All right, thank you. We'll receive or review, receive, and file those. Move on to item 6B, quarterly pension enhancement account. So we look at that report that we had gotten from Wells Fargo, and we allocate, the quarter had an 11.25% gain. So we allocate that interest also to that reserve of funds that we have for the enhancement fund, the 13th check. And that added for the quarter an additional 83,523.87. So that's just for our quarter ending December 31, 2020. So looking back on this sheet, draw your attention that next block of figures up, or the October 2019 through September 2020. I put all those amounts together. We had an interest rate of return of 11.46%. That gave us a gain in this fund of 102,984.90 for the fiscal year. Now, this is where we kind of have taken in the past that we'll take that gain, we'll allocate 50% into the principal of the fund and 50% to the retirees. I know last year we actually had a loss, but we were able to still allocate a 13th check due to the fact that we had reserved those additional 50% every year. So looking at a total right now, the lowest estimate that we could give for a 13th check based on this allocation is a $51,492.45. And the range of that allocation is going to be about $500 to an additional $1,300, depending on the length of retirement. Okay. Any discussion on that or any more comments?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good job, Mary.
We'll receive, review, and file that as well.
Actually, this is gonna be for that 13th check. So
Want to do a vote on it?
yes, I'm looking for a motion of what amount we want to approve for that 13th check.
So I move that we use the 50% of the gain, and we allocate that to the 13th check to be dispersed using the formula that you use every year. The longest retirees getting the most.
Okay, so a motion for $51,492.45. Anybody second that?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 4-0 for the 13th check distribution.
It's awesome that we're still able to do that. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mary.
The item C was the 13th check discussion. We're beyond that, so we'll move on to item 6D, the invoice from Van Overbeek for legal services.
Yeah, of course, during COVID, we have had a bunch of legislation that we've been trying to keep up on, and thankfully Van Overbeek has been able to keep us on top of that, making sure that any resolutions that need to be passed have been made. So this is just that quarterly billing.
Okay. Any other discussion from the members? Not seeing or hearing any, so would you like a vote to pay that bill, Mary?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you hear a motion to pay $170.10 to Van Overbeek?
I'll make a motion to pay the bill.
Gigi, was that a second from you?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Not hearing any. We'll pass it 4-0. Moving on to item 7, public comment. Not seeing anybody here that would want to make public comment. Comment from members. Does anybody want to make a comment?
I just want to apologize to you for missing the meeting last month. I missed that we were meeting at 10 rather than 8:30, and tax season had started and I was unable to be there, but I've got the 10 a.m. Time in my mind now, so I should be good going forward.
Duly noted. We'll try to get back to normal for you. These are confusing times. Anything else?
I'm
All right.
good. Thanks, guys.
All right, I'll move for adjournment at 10:28.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Pass adjournment at